Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Today we have a wonderful guest who over the past decade has built an enormous following around the world based on his ability to develop accurate visions of the future and describe the opportunities ahead. Having started 17 businesses himself and assisting on the development of hundreds more, the understanding he brings to his audiences is a rare blend of reality-based thinking coupled with clear-headed visualization of the world. And he's joining us today to talk about his new book, Epiphany Z. It's 8 radical visions for transforming your future. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Thomas Fry. Thomas, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
I think one of the neatest things I read in this book of yours, Epiphany Z, is the idea of the future, how it's pulling us forward like a vacuum. and it's so true that no matter how much we try to avoid, much like aging it seems, it's inevitable.
It absolutely is. And it's, I asked the question, is time actually just incrementally stepping us forward, or it's the future pulling us forward? There's lots of things we don't know about the future, and it's I think of it as a force of nature.
Now, why did you title your book Epiphany Z with a Z?
Well, it has to do with kind of the ultimate epiphany, kind of the what's our prime directive as humans? What's our main goal? And so trying to get to the ultimate epiphany, if you will. See, everybody has epiphanies. We wake up in the middle of the night and we have this idea in our head, and sometimes these are what I refer to as the grand epiphany, the big one, the ones that keep us awake for hours on end as we roll these ideas around in our head. This is something that's really captivated us in some way. But then you start to realize that this epiphany it creates an obligation in your life. I mean, you have to do something with it. Either you have to move it forward, or you have to make a conscious decision to kill it and let it die. And while a lot of people love the idea of having these grand ideas, it's just we tend not to know what to do with them. So I've come to the conclusion that most of the major problems in the world today have already been solved in the minds of people that have these epiphanies in the middle of the night, and they have absolutely no idea what to do with them after that.
Yeah, it seems everybody usually has a great idea and they stew it around, but they never put it down on paper or put it at their fingertips and get it moving forward. That's for sure.
Yeah, we do have more options now than we ever did in the past. In the past, people you could talk to and maybe get a company to take it on or something. But today, I mean, we can post it on social media, on Facebook. We can put it. There's lots of different avenues in the digital world for recording these ideas for use at a later time, and so we do have more tools today, but it's still it requires action. It requires that we do something with it, and so in defense of this idea of epiphanies, though, every new business has gotten launched with an epiphany, and then every new product that we come up with has started with an epiphany. So it's actually in our best interest to have more epiphanies, but then we have to know what to do with them once we have them. So that's where we have some gaps there.
Well, there's no doubt, too, when you take a look at today's technology, that the idea of recording seems almost instantaneous in such a way that you could talk into the air and something is going to get you recorded.
Right. And more so in the future, as I was just working on a column on the AI that's going to be part of us in the future. I mean, I think each of us will have kind of this AI agent that's kind of part and parcel to who we are, and it'll help us think through things. It'll help optimize our life. It'll help us the best foods and wear the right clothes at the right time, and it'll adjust things in our house so we get the best kind of sleep, that sort of thing. But we're still a little ways away from that. We got to work our way into that.
Now, you discuss something known as the 12 laws in your book. Let's talk about that a little bit and what they are when it comes to laws of the future.
Yeah, so I was trying to help put the future in perspective, and it's hard to do. So I came up with the 12 laws that are intended to kind of frame our thinking a little bit here. And so I start off with just kind of stepping us through it. And I talk about kind of the history of the future, but so the first law is that the future is one of nature's greatest forces, and the second is that the present is separated from the future by an invisible field of knowability. And you know, does the future there's this interesting question: does the future arrive at the same time for everybody? Does it arrive at a fraction of a second different for some people than others? Can somebody know something just a little bit before somebody else? We have no way of actually gauging that. We have no way of actually testing that. So I like to speculate on things like that because I spend a lot of time thinking about our relationship with the future, because we're all going to be spending our time in the future, so we have to somehow embrace it. We have to get comfortable with it, and we just don't know that much about it. So each of us is going to experience the unfolding of the future differently. The future is non-existent until it exists, but we create our own approach vectors. So I ask this question: does the future somehow have a staging area? I mean, is it like a film that we experience at one frame at a time? Do we have the future framed out in front of us, and then what happens to the present once it's no longer there? I mean, we experience the present every fraction of a second, and then does it go into some reality waste heap somewhere along the way? So it's some real interesting ways of thinking about this and talking about it. So that's what the 12 laws of the future. If anybody wants to really dive into it, you can find it on futuristspeaker.com. The 12 laws of the future, and send me an email. I'll be glad to debate you on different topics or get into discussions with you.
Wow, yeah, that would be definitely something worth doing. You know, when it comes to learning about the future, what's the best way to optimize it, do you think? Because colleges and universities especially, they seem to be symbols for smart thinking, but I kind of question this day and age, especially over the last, say, 20 or 30 years, whether that's even true anymore. You know, I remember, for instance, there was an uncle that said, well, you go to college to learn to think, but it seems to be too much of a process where you learn this, and it has seemingly became linear in so many ways. And in a lot of cases, it seems to be stagnant as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I get into this whole topic and the future of education quite a bit because, education means different things to different people, and there's no one-size-fits-all formula for getting educated. So for some reason, we've elevated college education higher than all other forms of education, and we're spending entirely too much money on it. We have student loans that have mushroomed into $1.4 trillion of debt just in the United States alone, with huge amounts being owed by people that are still over 65 years old. We are essentially sucking money from the future into our lives today to pay for our lives today. it's really way too expensive. And I think a lot of people would be better off not going to college and just going to a trade school and learning how to get a job. So there's lots of different ways of thinking about it. Now, when it comes to the 4-year degree, the 4-year degree was actually an American invention that happened in the early 1800s. And at the time, information was very scarce. It was hard to come by this information, so we came up with this idea that rather than just training people on this core discipline that they were learning, that we needed to give them this breadth of education. And so half of the credit hours in a college degree are the breadth of education, the other half is in the core discipline or the major. And that's the same formula that's being used today for operating our colleges. Now, it couldn't be argued. It can be argued today that the breadth of education is already happening ambiently. That the average person today is consuming information 12 hours and 7 minutes every day because information is widely available. I mean, we have it everywhere. We're swimming in information on a daily basis. And so while a lot of what we're consuming is music and listening to watching sitcoms and doing crazy stuff online, but in the middle of all that is actually some really good stuff. So we could argue that, but that would mean that colleges then could get by educating people with half the amount of credits, which would actually destroy the economics of colleges today, because they're all built up around that amount of time, that 4-year degree. And so they're as these aging institutions, they have a hard time shifting gears and trying something new. So I'm not thinking that anybody's going to adapt to that anytime soon. But I think we're on the edge now of having technology kind of circumvent the whole system that we have in place. My prediction has been that by 2030, the largest company on the internet, bigger than the Facebook and Apple and Google, is going to be a technology-based company that an education-based company that we haven't heard of yet. And so that's kind of what I've been thinking.
You know, and it's funny that you have such access to information now. It's like you kind of wonder what the need for colleges even is.
Right. Well, in some places it's still valuable. I mean, there's certain, like the engineering degrees and stuff like that are still valuable, but there are other ones that the value is pretty nebulous. It's hard to really quantify it and say that this is going to serve you well. I mean, getting a degree in sociology or psychology, which are some of the real common ones, I mean, a real common scenario is that somebody ends up getting their college degree and then they can't find a job, and they sit around for a while, and after a couple months they pick up a project, and then they pick up another project and another project, and before they realize that they're actually working as a freelancer, only nobody bothered to teach them how to become a freelancer, and they're doing it begrudgingly, thinking that the world kind of owed them a full-time job, never realizing that being a freelancer could actually be the optimal lifestyle, that you can say no to the things you don't want to do, say yes to the things that you're good at, and actually excel at those things and create actually a pretty good business model around that. So I think there's huge opportunities out there that kind of in between the cracks that are out there. I think we have some huge cracks in society that nobody's quite stepped up to the plate and decided to fill those yet.
Now, one of the things I thought was unique was the idea of the world without prisons. What would that be like? Yeah,
we have it ingrained in our head that this idea that we have to incarcerate people when they've done something wrong. We've actually had some mastermind groups around this topic of should we gamify citizenship, because in the U.S. and most countries we're actually really good at punishing people for bad behavior, but we're not good at incentivizing people for good behavior. So if I don't know, open the door for enough elderly ladies or help them across the street, do I get extra points, and can I win enough extra points to get a free television or a trip to Hawaii for 2 or something like that? But we focus on the negative. We focus on incarcerating people, and we have this one-size-fits-all form of punishment, just incarceration. And so I like to challenge a lot of the assumptions. Right now we have kind of this insane system. We have the greatest the highest percentage of our population incarcerated of any country at any time in history. We also have the greatest number of laws of any country at any time in history. And it begs the question, are we somehow worse people than other countries? I mean, do we need to be punished more in the U.S. than other countries? I just think it's a bad system. And so if we would actually come at it from this totally opposite end of the spectrum, what would it look like a world without incarceration whatsoever? And how do we punish people for bad behavior but incentivize them for good behavior? And then what does that look like? It raises a lot more questions we have answers for right now, but I think it's worth having many more discussions about.
You know, and it's so true too, because I found, even as a supervisor, that when I found people doing things right more often than I found them doing things wrong, you almost rarely ever see them in bad behavior.
Yeah. So part of one of the questions that we were wrestling with is what things would constitute good behavior. And one of our senior fellows suggested this idea of, what if we got a point for just creating a smile on somebody else's face? I mean, we have cameras everywhere now, and we can actually record all kinds of things that are happening. So what kind of different society would it be if everybody was actually doing some things to make other people happy, rather than just walking around with a stoic face, kind of ignoring everybody? What if there was a conscious effort to interact with people, to actually create a smile on everybody else's face? Now, I know that there was an episode of Black Mirror that kind of took this topic and it ran it into the dirt totally. But I'm wondering about the implications of looking at it through a different lens, though, and is that something worth considering? With a lot of the stuff I do, I end up being more asking good questions, being a professional conversation starter, than having all the answers. I think somebody needs to be asking these questions.
Now, you also talk about what are known as disruptive infrastructures. Give us an idea what that is.
Well, the perfect example of a disruptive infrastructure is all the tube transportation that's going on right now, all the effort that's going into Hyperloop, and being able to put maglev capsules into these tubes and shooting them around the world. Now, very soon we're going to have some working prototypes of this. There's several countries that are wanting to take the lead on it. Now, the key thing is can we integrate this into a system that's global in nature? Can we build bridges across the Bering Strait, connecting Alaska and Russia? Can we build bridges for these tubes that go across the Darien Gap that connect North and South America, and then connecting some of the islands, connecting Japan to Korea, connecting Europe to Africa through the Gibraltar Strait? If we can do all this, then we start integrating society in such interesting ways, building a network where we become a very fluid society then, where we can jump into a tube, and some of the speculation is that we can actually ramp up these tubes to, I've heard speculation as high as 4,000 miles an hour, meaning that we could go from New York to Beijing in less than 2 hours, and the cost of actually doing that is actually quite low. So are we able to actually build that type of infrastructure? That would be incredibly disruptive in how we do business today. I would love to see that type of thing happen. There's other types of disruptive infrastructure too. I mean, just building drone taxi systems where we have airports, mini airports around cities for these drones that can fly across town. This type of transportation is just radical to our thinking right now, but it's really in the formative stages, and it's happening as we're speaking here.
Now, one thing I found kind of interesting, and I know they've certainly been working on this for a long time, is writing about how death can become optional.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of work being done on improving human aging. I mean, we're controlling a lot of the characteristics of aging right now, and so we had one of our groups where we looked at this topic of this idea that we can cure, in the future we're going to be able to cure most diseases. So if we can cure all these diseases, can we also cure human aging? And that it looks like that's doable. It looks like that might indeed be possible, so that we can get to a point where we no longer age. Then can we cure human aging? Can we cure deviant behavior? Can we, if we have an accident, can we rebuild people? And then we get to this question of no person should ever die ever. Is that what we're aiming towards? Should we actually have this goal in mind that no person should ever die ever? And should that be our goal, even if it's 1 in a 20 trillion chance of that actually succeeding? Should that not be our goal in the healthcare community? I think it's such a fascinating question, and once we start going down this path, I hear lots of people saying, well, I wouldn't want to live forever. But if you had the body of a 20-year-old, and if you weren't showing any of the signs of aging, why not live a lot longer than you are right now? It raises so many fascinating questions. It becomes this whole philosophical debate.
Yeah, I remember it was the movie Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams, and he starts off as a robot, and eventually he wants to become human. And ultimately, to do that, I mean, he had a full body replacement, but then he had to have human blood, and that's what would actually cause him to age and deteriorate, I guess, is the way that works. But, you know, you think about the fact that here this person, if you will, this AI, had lived to, let's say, 150, 200 years old. It made you kind of wonder, for instance, well, who would you talk to? You know, how would you create friendships, especially if you're losing friends, things like that. And it was also kind of depicted as well in the movie Highlander, you know, where here was this immortal going through what seemed like decades and centuries, in fact. And,
right.
You know, you're going to be putting a lot of stuff behind you.
Right. All of our systems start to fall apart once we live radically longer than we do right now. So, as an example, we're already struggling with our Social Security system because people can stay working till they're 70, 75 real easy. And so it doesn't really make that much sense to just retire at age 65 and then be retired for the living another 50, 100 years. I mean, if you could live 100 years after you retire, our systems no longer work. Our health insurance doesn't work. Our life insurance policies don't work. Just all of these start falling apart. And so what actually makes sense then? And so we have to create new standards, new ways of thinking about it. We haven't had those discussions yet.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating when you look at all these systems that were put in place, which seem to have been created during the industrial age anyway, which doesn't seem to exist too much, especially in America.
Yeah, the concept of retirement was invented a relatively short period of time ago. I remember years ago when I first started at IBM, I had a lot of people that their goal was to work till age 65, then retire and spend all their money and buy an RV and travel around the world. Well, after about 4 or 5 weeks traveling around in an RV, they said, "Wow, this really sucks." And then they have to figure out what to do with the rest of their life because that plan was a total failure.
Right. Or they think they're going to golf. Yeah.
Right.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, that wears out pretty quickly.
Yeah, I know there was a guest we had on the program that talked about that, and, what you should do and what we seem to be moving toward are what they call mini retirements. So you'll retire for like 3 to 4 months, then you'll go back to work and so forth. And what he was really talking about too is and it's one thing they don't teach, or that, at least I think parents should actually teach their own children and change the family tree, if you will, is start learning how to design a lifestyle rather than trying to go get a career, so to speak. Right.
Yeah, there's a huge number of people. There's a recent study, I forget the exact number, it's like 264,000 people that are still working over the age of 85. I mean, they're not working full time, but they actually are earning income after age 85, which was kind of shocking in a lot of ways. This is radically different than what was happening, 30, 40 years ago.
I know my own parents. You figure my mom, I think she'll be 70 this year, and she drives a school bus for the high school, and my dad, he sold his 2 businesses years ago, and he goes back out to work, and he does it mainly just because it gives him something to do, people to connect with, things like that. So you really got to think about that, especially when it comes to your future, rather than retirement planning.
Right. There's been so much speculation about us automating jobs out of existence. And it's actually working the opposite of that. We're actually, all of this technology is creating new jobs. We're actually, in the way I think about it, is we're moving into an era of super employment. But it's not going to be full-time jobs. It'll be lots of projects, lots of gigs, if you will. And this whole gig economy that we're moving into will create opportunities in ways that we never imagined in the past. So even today, I mean, we have 1.3 million people working as Uber drivers today. This was an option that didn't exist 10 years ago. So these Uber drivers are doing it. A lot of them are doing it part-time to fill in between this job and that job. Other ones are, they work as housekeepers in the morning, or they work as security guards at night and drive Uber in between, and so they're piecing together a lifestyle that works for them, and I find it all quite fascinating.
Yeah, and when you talk about Uber too, I know several people, for instance, because you have more, let's say, food delivery systems in place. I think there's probably, I know of at least 6 different companies where you can actually deliver food from restaurants to people's homes. And I think the uniqueness about that whole thing is that we seem to be moving away from the idea that you need to go out and please somebody with a really good interview to maybe get the job, whereas now it's pretty much, we have too much of a demand to be wasting time with that. Just make sure you play by the rules and you got the job.
Yeah, it's an entirely different approach to doing things. And I mean, we were so conditioned in the past that you go into a store and you check out. You have to go to the cashier in the front of the store, and now we're seeing these storefronts that have no people working in them. They just keep track of everything that you take, and as you walk out, you're instantly charged for all the things that you take with you. There's a vending machine called the Bodega vending machine that's like a mini convenience store. And so you just swipe your card and open the big doors in the front and take out whatever you want, and then it charges you for the things you've taken. We're learning to do things without having that gatekeeper, that human in the middle there. And that's quite fascinating. Now, there are several companies working on this idea of driverless mobile convenience stores that if you late at night you decide that you want something from the store, but you don't want to get dressed to go get it, so then you just use your phone, you summon this convenience store, it shows up at your front of your house, and then you just go out, pick out whatever you want, and then it drives away. That's a whole different way of thinking about kind of the way we do business.
Now, speaking of gatekeepers, one series that I began watching some time ago, I found fascinating even when Michael Crichton wrote the book many years ago and it was made in the movie, is Westworld, and the idea of human AI. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, human AI is, well, it's not us versus them, and so we need to get that out of our heads.
I know it always seems the machines are out to get us, like in Terminator.
Yeah.
The machine's going to become self-aware, just eradicate everybody. It's like, well, what was the point of that?
Yeah. Nobody has explained to me. I mean, there's all this talk about the evil robots, the Terminators, the AI that's going to take over the world.
And that's leaving the aliens out of the loop.
Yeah, but nobody has really tackled that fundamental question of why. Why would they do that? I mean, what's their goal? What's their objective? And it just doesn't make any sense. So what we are moving into is an era where we're going to have robots that work with us. It's us and them. It's us and the AI. So we're going to have exoskeletons that we wear that help us do physical labor. We can do 3 or 4 times as much physical labor in a day because this exoskeleton actually assists us along the way. It's the same with the AI. The AI can spot things that are going on. It'll help us make decisions, help us think through the food that we're eating. It'll protect us because it'll scan things around the area. It'll know when we're in trouble. It'll coach us on different things about purchase decisions and all of these different things in our lives. And I think we're going to actually have a better lifestyle as a result of it. Now, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong, and we have to work through many iterations of these technologies to get it right. I have to remind people that the cars that we drive today have been in development for 120 years. So it's taken it's taken 120 years to get to a car that's this good. So with all of this emerging technology, we have to work our way through the crappy stages before we get to the good stuff. And we still have a long ways to go with the crappy stages on a lot of this technology.
And it's good that you brought that up, too, because just recently we took a trip to Los Angeles, and I left there back in the 1970s, and to me it seemed like the smog was actually better now than it was then. And, a lot of that I would have to think, could be attributed to the cars being a lot more efficient when it comes to exhaust.
Yeah, the fact that when we start shifting over to electric vehicles, that'll take care of a lot of it. But if you saw pictures of what New York City or Pittsburgh looked like at the turn of the century, around 1900, these are lots of coal-burning fireplaces, and the whole town was just covered in soot every morning when they woke up. We've improved it a lot, but we're still not to the point where we'd like to be. I personally have this hang up on the term climate change, and it's not that it's not happening. It's just that I, as an individual, don't know what to do about climate change. If people talk about pollution, I know more what I can do about pollution, but as an individual, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do about climate change. So I think if we focus on the pollution issue, I think we're just way farther along on cleaning up our environment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, especially when it comes to plastic, as I noticed that they're starting to phase out, for instance, plastic straws, things like that, and, in favor of paper. In fact, it was probably about a month ago somebody said something about you could be cited in California, I guess, for having a plastic straw. What are you talking about? I don't see how the courts are going to waste any time on something as dumb as that, but you never know sometimes. That's the other thing, because you were talking about, eradicating or seeing prisons perhaps go by the wayside, and you're right that no other country in the world incarcerates people at the rate that we do here in the United States, and it kind of leaves you questioning, well, if this system doesn't work, especially the people who work in it, they say, this is a completely broken system, it's nonsense, and you realize, who's on the take. It's more about extracting money than it is actually getting you to, behave yourself, I would think. That you have to take a look at, law enforcement itself. Originally what law enforcement was to protect people who had land. And then all of a sudden they moved and created this body of government, and now they're, making sure that you obey laws. And so it's kind of funny. How do you see an evolution in, let's say, law enforcement?
Well, our local city manager here told us that 80% of the police force in our local town here is dedicated to traffic control. And so you start thinking about that. That's a huge number of police that across the country that's just dedicated to controlling the traffic. Now, as soon as we move into a driverless era where the cars will drive themselves and take care of that, then suddenly we no longer need the traffic cops, the meter maids, the traffic courts, the DAs, all of these court systems that have been set up around that. Some cities, as much as 30% of the income coming into the city comes from traffic violations. That just seems like so much bad karma.
Well, not only that, but now with the, and this was an experience I had some years ago, I got fined for an expired tag. It was just 30 days, an expired tag, okay? And my fine was $45, but in assessments they added another $105, so it's like these guys are giving themselves raises and they're wondering why everybody's so upset with them.
Yeah,
we're just doing our jobs, but your job pisses everybody off.
Yeah, if anybody could just indiscriminately go ahead and...
Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and add another $100 to your ticket, because it's in fact, one of the assessments that was funny was actually $25 to the citing officer. Oh, so this guy's getting commissions now on the tickets that he writes.
Yeah. Can I assess a fine on my employer so I get an extra $200 in my paycheck because they didn't?
He put me in a bad mood today. That's for emotional damages. That's $300.
Yeah, they didn't smile at me today. That was bad.
It's funny because there seems to be arguments on both sides, especially when it comes to technology. But I've found that technology, although we seem to be so distracted, where it seems people are born with cell phones in their hand for whatever reason. They're always holding these things. Is that technology, on the other hand, has created a lot of great opportunity, especially for young people. When you take a look at, for instance, YouTube, there are some kids on there that are making phenomenal amounts of money just being creators. And so you see, I guess, the advantages is technology has allowed what has been pulled out of schools, such as the arts and things like that, and they put it there where kids can say, okay, well, I'm going to pursue this on my own. And there's some fantastic creative stuff that you see being produced as a result of this. So like I was saying earlier about, for instance, you would go out and try to please somebody in a job interview to get the job. We're kind of pushing those people aside and saying, we don't need you anymore. We're going to go out and do our own thing. So you're seeing more entrepreneurship, I would think.
Yeah, in addition to that, lots of the people that have decided to take the freelancer lifestyle can pick up jobs online. They pick up this project and that project, and if they're doing it right, they can actually make seriously good money. It's something like,
and they do.
17% of freelancers are making over $100,000 a year. And there's like 5 million freelancers in the United States right now. So there's some serious opportunities out there, but they're really kind of operating under the radar. A lot of people don't know that they exist, and it works outside of what we're training people for with our college and our education system right now. So people are just figuring it out, and I think that's absolutely fascinating.
I know I had one. It was kind of a slight argument, but not really a big one, years ago when I was serving as I worked in the restaurant industry. And there was a family, a single daughter, and her dream was to work as a chef, and she was still in high school. And I said, if it's something you really want to do, I said, don't go to cooking school. Just go hire on at a place like a Denny's, one of them 24-hour breakfast places, and learn what it takes to do the skill itself. And then from there, you'll just kind of learn and build from that, because these cooking schools are charging a lot of money for people to go out and really just have basic cooking skills, it seems.
Right.
And the parents were adamant, nope, she's going to college first, blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, do you plan to are you going to pay for college? They said, no, she'll figure that out. And I said, then why are you dictating her future like this? I said, I'm trying to show her how she can, A, pursue her dream the right way, B, get paid to pursue her dream rather than paying somebody to pursue it. That's a little shift in thinking there. And 3, do something she really loves to do, And you're telling her to go this traditional route. How did that work for you?
Yeah.
And I didn't mean for that to become the argument that it seemed to have, but I was just saying, take a look at this as an option. Then she can go to college and learn the things she needs to do that enhances the knowledge that she already has. Another way of looking at it anyway.
Yeah, the cost of education is spiraled out of control, and it's because the money is so free and easy to access.
Right.
And it never quite happens this way, but if you can imagine somebody from a college sitting down with an 18-year-old kid and basically saying, hey, do you want to drive that fast car? Do you want to live at that house in the mountains or on the beach? Just all you have to do is sign here, and all your dreams will come true. That's the message that's coming across to young people. And they have no way of putting that in perspective, because at 18, you have no idea what it's like to repay $200,000 later in your life. You just think that, I'm going to be making tons of money, so that'll be easy. And so you can just kind of dream your way into saying yes to that. But it becomes this false reality that they have a rude awakening a few years later that, oh my God, I have to pay $700 a month now, and I'm only making $1,500 a month. That's the reality.
Now, speaking of dreaming, what about technology in the future if it isn't already here now? If I don't know if you remember, there was a movie called Brainstorm starring James Woods, and what they did is they created sort of this helmet that you put on your head that can actually extract your experiences in such a way that if somebody else put the helmet on, they can experience these things just the way you did.
Yeah, there's been quite a few different scenarios similar to that showed up in the different science fiction communities. But the kind of the big debate right now is, can we actually download somebody's entire life and put them online? Can we download the essence of who this person is, and they can live forever in the online world, in this digital world? And my way of thinking is that we're still a long ways from truly understanding what it is that is the essence of being a human. We don't know all the. I mean, in the online world, you don't have fingers, you don't have taste buds, you don't have the ability to smell things, and then even when you can create those things. This idea of not having a physical presence, being able to stand up and talk face to face with somebody, that those are elements that are hard to understand, hard to quantify, and so there's still a lot of these pieces that are missing. So will we get there in the future? I'm not even sure. Mm-hmm. But some of these things are really difficult problems to solve. I mean, just the idea of creating a holographic image, this three-dimensional display that actually displays things that see we spend our lives actually being trained to think two-dimensionally. We're trained on two-dimensional whiteboards and blackboards, two-dimensional paper. Even our computer screens are two-dimensional. So then once we get into this three-dimensional world, this three-dimensional thinking, I mean, if we can get rid of the display on our computer and display things three-dimensionally above it, I mean, we can't even imagine what it would be like to surf the internet or to three-dimensional charts and graphs. What does that third dimension actually represent? We haven't trained our minds to think that way, and we're finally getting into that with a lot of the VR and the AR stuff that's out there. But it almost seems to me that we're going to have young people raised from birth with that type of technology, so that they can actually understand what the thinking three-dimensionally is going to be about. But the idea of holography was first proposed in 1948 by Dennis Gabor, and that was 60, 70, 80 years ago. So we're still not there, and so some of these problems are way harder to solve than we first think they are.
Well, and here's another one that I find very unique, too. When we take a look at now, 3D printing is here. You know, you basically feed the materials into the machine along with a schematic, and it creates what you want. So apparently now there's a restriction like you can't produce guns. Okay, otherwise that for some reason is against the law. Okay, so we're allowed to have and bear arms. We're allowed to go and buy guns in the store, but we can't produce our own and cut out Remington and all those guys who actually produce these things. So you get into some really crazy arguments about what we're allowed to do on our own, you know.
Right.
And it even so, for instance, as you were talking earlier, the idea that there could come a day, and I remember this from the movie, I think it was called Elysium or something like that, where Matt Damon's character tries to get his daughter up to this City in the Sky, where they have this machine you can put a person into with any disease. Doesn't matter what it is or whatever's wrong with them. They could have a broken arm or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is, and this thing cures the whole thing. You just lay in there and this machine does what it does.
Right.
But it was exclusively just for those people who were in the City in the Sky. So why can't these people have it? What makes them so different? It's, well, they worked a little harder to be in the City in the Sky, but it's the same argument here that if we created a machine that could do that, the argument then comes from the healthcare industry that says now you're cutting out a bunch of revenue that we would normally get doing things the old way, such as repairing hearts, trying to beat cancer through chemotherapy and radiation. So you get into some really crazy arguments with a lot of this proposed futuristic thinking.
Right. And when do we put too much power in the hands of the individual? Over the years, we have been putting much more power into the hands of a single individual, to the point where, one hacker can actually disable a country. One person with the right explosives could take down a government. They could take on a war. It didn't take many people that were involved to take down the Twin Towers in New York City. And so we're getting to that point. So how do we? The people that are trying to protect us, that becomes a harder task then. How do we know when we're in danger? When danger can come in 10,000 different forms. It's a real tricky thing to answer that. And then, on one hand, we want privacy, on the other hand, we want convenience, and then there's the third leg of the stool is security. And whenever you get too much of one, then it throws you out of balance with the other ones. So those are some of the things we have to consider as we kind of develop a ethical, philosophical basis for how we should operate in the future.
Like I said, for the listeners out there, the book is Epiphany Z. It's 8 Radical Visions for Transforming Your Future. It's going to certainly create a lot of lively discussions, and a lot of it seems to be right on the fringe already here. It's just a matter of developing even further. What would you consider the ultimate epiphany?
One of them in my mind would be, the epiphany, if you figure out how to control gravity, that would be one that would be one of the ultimate ones.
Or being able to become invisible like the Predator.
Yeah.
Turn that on and off.
Yeah, or travel across time. Those are some of the things that have been these dreams of humanity forever. And they're still out there. They'll be out there for a while still.
Absolutely. Well, it's a fascinating book, and it's always a pleasure to have you on the program to talk about these things, so people can be aware. Hey, this is on the future. It's coming. So you either adapt and go with it, or get left behind. I guess that's what ultimately happens there. How can people get a copy of your book? Is there a website they can visit and find out more about your work?
They can go to futuristspeaker.com. I have all the columns that I write are on there. Also, we do events at the Da Vinci Institute, which is in Westminster, Colorado. Just go to davinciinstitute.com and you'll see some of our upcoming events there. But the book Epiphany Z is available at Barnes & Noble, on Amazon. Most bookstores have it. You can get it online real easy. So, and if you have a hard time getting it, just give me a call. And by the way, I'll make the announcement today that we're going to have the audio version of Epiphany Z out within just a couple weeks here. So that's coming very soon.
Oh, right on. Well, very good. Well, Thomas, thank you for joining us here on the program today. It's again, always a lively, enlightening discussion about, you think, well, that would be cool, but then you got to realize sometimes certain things are created like laws that sometimes have unintended circumstances and consequences.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy stuff.
Absolutely. Just when we think we know what's going on, then things change.
Absolutely, and it's going to. That's one inevitable rule of life. Things change.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on.
You bet, Thomas. It was a pleasure. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. One of the future moves you can make is visit us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter to stay up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50, as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.